What is up, everybody? James Jackson here, back again with another video. If you're new to my channel, I do tips, tricks, news, and reviews for the film and video making industry. So if this is content that you do like, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and also hit the like so it can help the algorithms out, and hit that bell so you can stay up to date on all the content going forth. I recently got a comment on one of my previous videos revolving the color space transform in Davinci Resolve. It was from the video where I basically talked about how log really doesn't matter when using the color space transform, because you can basically remap the log space however you want it. But somebody did comment it and said, hey, what if you come across a camera that's not part of the list of cameras or of gamma curves and color spaces that's not in Davinci Resolve? Because unfortunately, you know, Davinci Resolve doesn't give you every single color space that every single camera doesn't provide. Specifically the Zcams and the Kinefinity cameras. So this is coming from Jeremiah Bostwick. Hopefully I said your name right, man. Apologize if I didn't, but this is basically the comment he left me. The issue I'm having is that I am using a camera that isn't currently supported by Resolve, which is the Zcam E2 F6 Z-Log 2. There are several other cameras from smaller manufacturers that would also have problems. I think the Fuji F-Log isn't supported at all, neither is the log from Kinefinity or any cameras from Sigma. Those are just some examples off the top of my head, but I am sure there are others. So although CST is for sure best practice, if you have an unsupported camera that this workflow doesn't work at all. As someone new to Resolve, this has been the big hurdle of understanding best practices to color grade when perhaps the most important tool isn't available. Thank you for the comment, man. I want to definitely appreciate it. So I basically asked him to give me some example footages, but he was sort of see some grades where you don't really have the best things. They're necessary whites and necessary blacks. So this is actually what I am going to be doing today. I'm going to basically show how, if you have the Zcam E2 F6 as well as a Kinefinity camera, specifically we're going to be looking at footages from the newly released Mavo Edge, the big full-frame 8K camera. So these are sample footages coming from different creators. The Mavo's coming from Gappa Gear. If you haven't checked out his channel, he's been dropping a whole bunch of Mavo Edge content. So definitely check it out. I'll make sure to leave a link to that, as well as the Zcam footages. I'm going to leave links to where you can pick these samples footage up and grade them yourselves. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right all into this. Basically a few clips. I've doubled up a few, but this is the Zcam E2 F6 as well as this, and then these two are the Mavo Edge. And I'm actually going to show you how you can possibly basically still use the color space transform, even though technically they're not in the list. You'll find out through this video, you'll realize you can actually still use the color space transform, even though it doesn't necessarily have it. And I'll show you guys for both of these cameras. First, we're going to just go ahead and do a manual grade. So basically, I like to do a 5-step node just for this. So we're going to do this manually, and then we're going to use a plugin that's not in Davinci Resolve that I've talked about on a previous video, but we'll get to that in a second. So the big thing that you guys should know with especially grading Zcams is basically just knowing the wheels. Your primary color wheels, your log wheel, and the HDR wheel. We're going to just basically using these three to basically just get the color grade. So as we're seeing here, we got better dynamic range. So with this, I like to just check out the waveform. It's got a nice, pretty waveform. It's actually exactly sort of where you're dealing with log where you want to be is in that 30, 50. So I'm going to just start off with adding the contrast. And that's pretty good. And then I'm going to just adjust the pivot where I personally want. Now this mileage may vary, so I think this is pretty good. And it's in a good range. I like to have the range of the top part in the 768 and 896, and then the black sort of here where I will bring the log wheel. That's where I will go to the log wheel, which I will go into the next node. Now, this is not necessarily the way you have to do it. With the primary wheels, you can go either, you can mix them up however way you want. But just for this demonstration, I'm going to show it. The key thing you just need to know with the primaries and log wheels and the HDR wheels is they're just basically different types of brushes. And I'll go more into details in a different video on basically sort of their functionality and how you can just mix and match them together. But to keep this, we're going to just focus on here. So let's go back to it. Let's go with the log wheel. So I'm going to just use the highlights to sort of just stretch out the dynamic range. And then pull this down. Now I'm going to go to the third one, and this is where I'll put the HDR. And I'm specifically doing the HDR wheel here because I want to make sure that when I pull, because all these have already affected the image. If I started with the HDR wheel, it's not going to be as affected. I won't get the highlights where I want to, which is this. I got the lights, which is the sky, shadows, basically where I want them to be. So let's actually do it here. So you can see we got the light, we got the highlights, and then we got shadows. So here I'm going to just stretch the highlights. Actually, I'm going to start with the lights. I personally want to bring this down just a little bit, just to fine tune it. I like keeping it, I personally like keeping it 60, but again, your mileage may vary. And then I'm going to stretch the highlights out ever so slightly just to give a little bit more tonal. And then we're going to go to the shadow side. I want to pull this up just ever so slightly. Not too much, but just to bring it above that 128 level. This, again, it's all preferences, but I just like to do this. And then I'm going to go to the dark and pull that down because I really want to build in those blacks. And as we do bring it up here, this is actually a pretty good start. This is a pretty good starting point. And now, and what I also love about the HDR wheel, I prefer doing the saturation here because it's actually mapping to the mathematical point of the image, especially if you know what the log wheel is. So, which we'll get to in a second. And I'm going to pull this up. I like leaving it at 30. So, pulling up to 30. And I'll say for a Rec 709, this is actually a pretty good 709 footage. But we can actually get a little bit more. Let's say we want to just throw a little bit more vibrancy into the image. So I'm going to boost the colors a little bit to where I want it. Right here. Now, obviously, the saturation is a little bit too much on the skin, but I can dial that saturation back down. I'll go a little bit more. And I think that's pretty good. So let's look at, all right, so this is what it looked like before we did the color boost. And here is after. Before, after. It's subtle changes, but it's that subtlety that can give quite a bit of difference. So manual grading, very, very easily. And if you want, you can also, we can put like an extra node in between if we want to just check the white balance. And as I talked about, you want to make sure when you're doing that, display qualified focus, because this will definitely help you with your, so if we go here, so the highlight is a little bit above, so we can, so let's go to this one. As we can see, it's a little bit above, more in the red. It's a little bit more into the red and the yellow, and we can just go to the highlight portion here and just pull it slightly to the green, and now it's balanced. And now the white balance is balanced out. Before, after, before. It's subtle. But as you can see, very simple, easy grade if you just want to grade it manually. Now we're going to go to this one, and we're going to do a plugin that I've talked about on a previous video. If you haven't seen me talk about this, this is the Cinematch. I love Cinematch. It's a great plugin. It's from the same people that bring Film Convert. For Zcams, interestingly enough, they do have a profile for Zcams. Now, it's specifically for the E2 S6, but I believe the sensors are fairly similar, that you can basically still use the profile. But I'll show you guys. But you can basically use this and convert it to one of these profiles that fit the color space transform. So let's go back into this, and I'll show you what eyes with me. So we're going to add Cinematch, tonal, and then we're going to go to the shadow side. I want to pull this up just ever so slightly. Not too much, but just to bring it above that 128 level. This, again, it's all preferences, but I just like to do this. And then I'm going to go to the dark and pull that down because I really want to build in those blacks. And as we do bring it up here, this is actually a pretty good start. This is a pretty good starting point. And now, and what I also love about the HDR wheel, I prefer doing the saturation here because it's actually mapping to the mathematical point of the image, especially if you know what the log wheel is. So, which we'll get to in a second. And I'm going to pull this up. I like leaving it at 30. So, pulling up to 30. And I'll say for a Rec 709, this is actually a pretty good 709 footage. But we can actually get a little bit more. Let's say we want to just throw a little bit more vibrancy into the image. So I'm going to boost the colors a little bit to where I want it. Right here. Now, obviously, the saturation is a little bit too much on the skin, but I can dial that saturation back down. I'll go a little bit more. And I think that's pretty good. So let's look at, all right, so this is what it looked like before we did the color boost. And here is after. Before, after. It's subtle changes, but it's that subtlety that can give quite a bit of difference. So manual grading, very, very easily. And if you want, you can also, we can put like an extra node in between if we want to just check the white balance. And as I talked about, you want to make sure when you're doing that, display qualified focus, because this will definitely help you with your, so if we go here, so the highlight is a little bit above, so we can, so let's go to this one. As we can see, it's a little bit above, more in the red. It's a little bit more into the red and the yellow, and we can just go to the highlight portion here and just pull it slightly to the green, and now it's balanced. And now the white balance is balanced out. Before, after, before. It's subtle. But as you can see, very simple, easy grade if you just want to grade it manually. Now we're going to go to this one, and we're going to do a plugin that I've talked about on a previous video. If you haven't seen me talk about this, this is the Cinematch. I love Cinematch. It's a great plugin. It's from the same people that bring Film Convert. For Zcams, interestingly enough, they do have a profile for Zcams. Now, it's specifically for the E2 S6, but I believe the sensors are fairly similar, that you can basically still use the profile. But I'll show you guys. But you can basically use this and convert it to one of these profiles that fit the color space transform. So let's go back into this, and I'll show you what eyes with me. So we're going to add Cinematch, and we're going to go into our plugin. So as you can see right here, they have Zcam. Zcam E2, Zcam E2 S6, Zlog2. Now, in terms of the source range, just keep it at limit. I think that's the best method. According to Cinematch, just keep it at the default setting so you don't create too much contrast. And now we're going to convert it to something different. In this case, I'm going to choose the red, and I'm going to choose the Dragon sensor. And I do have a reason why, and I'll get to that later. And then we're going to choose red, wide, RGB gamut. So we're going to add that in. And boom. Now, one of the things we could do is we could just add the Rec 709 that is applied, and this is actually pretty good. In fact, it's kind of similar. It's kind of similar to what we did here. Now, obviously, there's a little bit more green, but of course, you can always. So, for example, the tint, you can turn the tint on and see. Okay, we can see. There's a little bit more green that maybe we would like, so we'll go just a little bit more magenta to get some of that green out of the hair. And again, if you want to just use the Rec 709, you can use Cinematch. Now, however, let's reset. Let's reset this. And let's say, hey, but now that we have this and we sort of set it up, we can actually now use the color space transform. We'll drop it here because you always want to add it to the end and make all your corrections before. Now we're going to add, and remember, we use the red, white gamut RGB, and we did the red log 3G10, and it converted it to 709. And now it is in a 709 format. Now we can now because we're in the red wide gamut, which is where I kind of want to be for this. We're going to make sure we will say, hey, we want to work 709. I think this one is gamma 2.4, so let's bring that up. And that's actually, and hey, there you go. You transform it. Now, again, we can always make adjustments. Again, we can always make adjustments if we take a look at the qualifier. It's a little bit more to the yellow, so we can always go before that, go to the highlights, and just slightly pull that down, and pull it a little bit more to the blue. And there we go. And there we go. So there is a way. So if you use Cinematch, again, it is an additional cost for the plugin, but it is well worth it if you want to do it. But as you can see, if you notice, it's kind of similar, even though this one's a little bit, her skin tone is a little bit more magenta, and I kind of like that a little bit more. And we can always bring the exposure. This seems like to be a little bit more underexposed. What we can do here is we can now, because we went to Cinematch, we can go to the color space, and because we're basically telling the computer, hey, this is a red camera. We're going to go red wide gamut, and then we're going to go with red log 3G10. So we're going to take the global, and then we're going to pull it up. We can still pull it up. If we want to, we'll add a little bit more contrast, and then we'll add a little, and then we'll adjust the pivot. All right, and then we'll go to this next one because it's still behaving. We're gonna turn this one to a nope, not wrong one. We're gonna turn this to red YG gamut, and we're gonna convert this to log 3G10. So get these highlights. So we're going to pull up. So let's say it's too much light. We're going to pull this down. We're going to pull this. We're going to stretch these highlights a bit. Let's go to waveform. And then we're going to raise the shadows a bit. But then we're going to pull the blacks down just for separation. And then let's also add one additional one before the LUT. So we'll go touch skin. So we're going to go here. Well, let's go to our vector scopes. I could definitely tell this is a little bit more yellow, and I'm pretty sure that's what this is. So we're going to actually take the yellow. So we're going to take the skin right here. And we're going to then we're just going to rotate this up towards, it's a bit too much. We're going to rotate it a little bit more to the red. And then we're also going to pull the saturation down just a bit. And this is actually pretty cool, pretty similar. And that's one of the things and this is one of the things that I noticed when I was editing, I was color grading the Zcam, and I was just noticing that this seems very similar to the color space, at least the colors and how the color space behaves. It's very grungy. It seems to shift in favor like greens. It favors greens and yellows, which is very common to what the Dragon sensor actually behaves. And what I've noticed with this is that you can actually, even though the profile is not technically in color space transform, you can actually basically treat it like red camera footage and use that to sort of make your transformation. And I'll show you on the next clip. So we'll go here. So on this one, we're just going to, instead of just using Cinematch, we're going to treat it like this was a red camera. So we're going to use the same profiles. So we're going to use red wide gamut, and then we're going to use, where is it? Red log 3G10. And boom. And what I've noticed is that it's actually pretty good. It's still very undersaturated, and you can even transform this. You can say, hey, this is 709, and then you can bring up the gamma space if you want to, or you could just keep the but it's actually pretty good right there. Just transforming it, just making it say, hey, this is a red camera. You can transform it to basically using the red wide gamut RGB and the log 3G10 gamma, and boom. And what I've noticed is that it's actually pretty good. It's still very undersaturated, and you can even transform this. You can say, hey, this is 709, and then you can bring up the gamma space if you want to, or you could just keep the but it's actually pretty good right there. Just transforming it, just making it say, hey, this is a red camera. You can transform it to basically using the red wide gamut RGB and the log 3G10 gamma. You actually get a pretty decent footage. And we'll apply this same thing. I'll just apply the grade here and add it here. Now for this one, I'm going to turn it off because of the environment, and this will be actually even better. So I'm just leaving it to the default settings, which is the timeline. But watch what happens. So now let's go back to let's go back to HDR. I'm trying to right now just set the exposure, so because you can see it's pretty low. So I'm going to set this to this color space, which is red wide gamut RGB, and then I'm going to set it to red log 3G10. And then I'm going to just simply bring this up. Right now I'm just bringing up the exposure to where I want it, and then I'm going to go to the next one, to the next node, and here's where I'm going to basically do what I normally do with color grading. So I'm going to just bring up the contrast a little bit. I'm going to adjust the pivot so to give her give her out a little bit more, and then I'm going to go to the gain. I'm going to stretch this out a little bit, bring the lift down, bring the gamma up. Again, and then bring the lift down to where I want to be. And now the next one, I'm going to go to the log wheel. I'm going to stretch out these highlights, and then I'm going to bring down the shadows. And now I'm going to go back to the HDR. We got the highlights, lights. So let's just say, okay, now we're going to just make the adjustments where we want. So we want to sort of just, because it's sort of an underlit area, we're going to bring it down just to make it more natural, but we still want to stretch those highlights out to stretch out that dynamic range that we have here. Let's bring the shadows up, bring the shadows down just a little bit, just to give it a little punch. And then we're going to drop the blacks. And now we're going to drop the dark areas, and let's pull the shadows down just a little bit more. And as you can see, just doing this is actually a pretty good image. It's very red-like. I will say this, the colors give a very similar red-like feature. And then again, if we want to just add some more saturation, we'll boost the saturation here. Again, I like to set it to 30. And then we can go to the next page to offset it by boosting the colors, but also bring the saturation down. And then we'll make one more to sort of adjust for skin. So let's go to the vector scope. Let's get the qualifier, see where our skin is. It's slightly off to the yellow. So we're actually, in this case, we're going to flip our yellows and we're going to rotate it more to the red. And that just ever so slightly, but boom. That's all we needed to do. And look at that. That to me looks like a pretty good fit. Again, this is just the skid into Rec 79. You can go really crazy of how you want. But again, all we did was basically assumed to make the Zcams as red footage instead of basically a Zcam. Now, obviously, if it was Zcam, it would be greater, it would be better. But I think the red space is actually good enough to use as an alternative if you still want to use the color space transform. So the color space transform is still very much an option for Zcams, even though technically the Zcams are not in there. But what about the Kinefinity cameras? So let's take a look at that, shall we? Because this one's very interesting. Now, I'm not going to go over everything like I did before because I just want to show you guys really quickly. Let's go to these Kinefinity cameras. So this is the Mavo Edge right here. Now, first off, now you'll notice there's like a digital glitch. There's something wrong with Davinci reading it. It's not the clip itself. There's something wrong with Davinci reading it. I don't know what it is. But if you notice, this is playing back pretty well. And let me just pull it out so you can see the file. You'll see here, this is the open gate. So if I was to reset this and turn the blanking off, the output blanking off, and reset this, it's in the open gate. So this is 3.2. So it's a 3.2 open gate format. And as you can see, it's playing back very well. Minus the glitch I don't know what it is. So this is 8K on a laptop playing back. I just got to say that real quick. But let's not delve too quickly. Here's the thing, just like the Zcam, what I noticed with the Kinefinity footage is that it's very similar. It is very similar to the Arri Alexa footage. Like here, I'll just drop the Arri Alexa right here, boom. And this is actually, and look at that. That's actually pretty damn impressive. Now, we may want to just add some contrast, but in terms of the image, that's actually really good. And if we just went to the color space transform instead, we're going to treat it like an Arri Alexa. So we're just going to say Arri Alexa, Arri Log C. And then we're going to, because we're in the wide gamut, that's where it is. We're just going to transfer it to 709. And we're going to say gamma 2.4. And look at that. It still looks really damn impressive. Funny enough, I'm really excited about this Mavo Edge because of the images that I have ever seen. This feels so much, at least from the motion, how the textures play off. This feels very similar to film. Again, ignore the glitch. But this image feels so similar how the motion works to film. But and then you can just make your adjustments here. So in this case, we want to add some more contrast. So let's just quickly add some contrast to this. We're gonna pivot up just to open it up a little bit. And then I'll just go to here. Because actually, yeah, I'll bring the gamma up. I'm gonna bring the gamma up a little, bring the gain down. And then I'm just gonna go to the highlights, pull this up, and then I'm going to go midtones, leave the shadows where it is, and then I'll just go to HDR real quick. And I will go to the light. Let's adjust this real quick right there. Highlights. We'll pull this down a little. We'll pull it down a little bit. We'll drop shadows. And then we'll pull the darks down. And there. Again, we just made some quick tweaks, but it's very impressive. So hopefully you guys learned from today that essentially what you should do is just sort of try some of the presets that are already in Davinci Resolve, even though your camera may not necessarily be in there. Most cameras today, no matter if it's Sony, Fuji, Kinefinity, Zcam, Blackmagic, Panasonic, they all tend to try to replicate either two of the big digital cameras, which is, of course, Red and Arri. They're all trying to replicate it because those are the cameras that have the biggest draw. So hopefully this was helpful to you. Jonathan, hopefully you got something out of this. And if someone else was able to get something out of this tutorial, I hope so. Let me know, leave your comments down below, and make sure to hit that subscribe button. And until next time, take care, everyone.